Peter Parker needs to put an end to a deranged scientist who has caused an insane and out-of-control mutation by carrying out body regeneration experiments on countless species. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, The Amazing Spider-Man from 2012. As Peter plays hide-and-seek with his father, he goes to the office, where he comes across a shocking scene. The place is completely destroyed. Just then, Richard Parker appears and closes the windows. He erases all the formulas he wrote down on the blackboard before leaving for Aunt May's house, where Peter will live for a while. After a few years, the young Parker has become a teenager who is much mocked by his classmates at school. Outside the school, the young man takes pictures of Gwen Stacy, but is interrupted by a commotion next door, where some big guys are holding an innocent young man. They ask Peter to take a picture of the scene, but he refuses, so Flash punches him. Parker tries to get up, but receives even more punches. Gwen appears and interrupts the fight, saying that she's going to meet the bully that night. At the family home, Aunt May asks about the bruise on the young man's face, and he says he fell off his skateboard. The young man goes down to the basement, where he comes across a suitcase that he recognizes from the night his father left. Uncle Ben has asked to keep the bag a secret, and inside is a photograph of the man with an unknown scientist. Inside there are also a pair of glasses, some calculators and some papers hidden in a secret pocket. Before Peter can analyze them, his uncle asks him to come into the room. The name of the scientist in the photo with Parker's father is Curt Connors, who is involved in research into cross-species genetics. His laboratory is at Oscorp Industries, and he encourages genetic change to make people stronger. The young man then goes to the company, where he pretends to be the new trainee. As he ventures through the building, he comes across Gwen, who introduces herself to several people. She says she's an intern at the company and is in her final year of science college. The group is taken to another part of the laboratory, where they meet Dr. Connors, who is missing one of his arms but intends to regenerate it through his research. Afterwards, the young man confesses to Gwen that he infiltrated the company only because he loves science, and she distrusts him. After the girl leaves, Peter bumps into a guy called Rajit and realizes that there is a familiar symbol in his briefcase. Peter follows the man, who opens the door to a room identified as the Biosable Development Unit. He manages to memorize the password, and after the men leave, he opens the door. In the laboratory there are several machines, and one of them is full of spiders, which fall on the young man, and he despairs. At the same time, Dr. Connors tells Rajit that the test results were disappointing, so he threatens him. Peter meets Stacy again and hands her his badge. At that moment, a spider inside his jacket bites his neck. During the journey home, Parker falls asleep on the subway and hallucinates. A man puts a bottle on his forehead and a drop of water wakes him up before it hits his face, so he jumps and manages to hold onto the ceiling, which scares everyone around him. The young man gets up quickly and apologizes to a woman for spilling a drink on her. However, his hand gets stuck in the woman's clothes, and a man pushes him, causing the blouse to come off her body. The guy attacks him and he accidentally pushes him away. While one of his hands is stuck to the railing, Peter kicks the people attacking him. One of them smashes the young man's skateboard with a blow, but doesn't manage to hurt him. Parker then uses so much force that he manages to break the subway handrail. When he gets home, Peter manages to catch a fly with his bare hands, which surprises Aunt May. The next day, Parker breaks the bathroom sink due to his extreme strength, so he is careful with the things he touches. Later, he realizes that his senses are heightened, as he can hear every little noise, like a spider walking. Peter goes to Dr. Connors' house and tells him that he is Richard Parker's son, and the scientist invites him in. The man confesses that he felt angry with Richard because he had taken all the promising results of the research. The young man questions the scientist about the side effects of crossing species and draws up formulas that solve his problem. The doctor then asks to set up a meeting with the youngster. Soon afterwards, Peter is defending a girl when a basketball comes towards him, but the object sticks to his hand and he calls Flash over to face him. The bully tries to take the object from Parker, but he quickly dodges and hits the young man in the back. The young man holds the ball and asks Flash to attack him. The bully can't because the ball is stuck in his opponent's hand. Parker then dribbles past Flash and makes a super leap towards the basket, which breaks, sending the young man to detention. Uncle Ben then picks the young man up from school, and the two are interrupted when Gwen Stacy appears, so Peter asks her out sometime. After that, the young man uses his new skills to ride a skateboard. He jumps several times, leaps to very high places and stands on his head like a spider. The next day, the young man goes to the Oscorp laboratories, where the doctor shows him a device that can disperse a gas throughout the city in a few seconds, but it is deactivated. At the moment, the professor intends to transfer regeneration abilities from a lizard to the guinea pig, which is a rat with one of its limbs removed. They then work together to transfer the gene through a system, and in every attempt the process fails, resulting in the elimination of the animals. However, Peter continues to try and one of the tests is successful, so that one of the mouse's paws grows perfectly and it survives. Soon after, they apply the genes to a real animal. Later, Parker arrives home and Uncle Ben calls him because he didn't answer the phone when he was supposed to and forgot to pick up his aunt from work. Peter gets upset and leaves through the living room door, which breaks due to his strength. Nevertheless, his uncle goes after him. In a convenience store, the young man tries to buy some food, but doesn't have enough money. A guy who was right behind him robs the cashier and gives him his food, so he lets the guy go unpunished. The attendant asks Peter for help, but he refuses because the man refused the sale for a few cents. The thief flees through the streets and his gun falls in front of Ben, who tries to react and is shot. Parker hears the noise and realizes that his uncle has just lost his life. The young man desperately calls for help and tries to stop the wound, but no one appears. Later, the police go to Peter's house to ask for a sketch of the subject, so the young man keeps the drawing for himself. At school, Flash tries to console Parker, but is attacked. Nevertheless, Gwen hugs him and he just ignores her. Later, the young man goes to the city's alleys to look for the guy who attacked Uncle Ben, and finds him threatening a woman. Peter attacks the man, but several henchmen appear and begin to surround him, so the young man runs away and jumps over a railing. The men run after the young man, until he climbs up a fire escape and his hands stick to the wall, which he climbs until he reaches the top of the building. On the terrace, Parker is surprised by the men, who pull at his feet when he tries to run away. Before running, the young man comes across the guy who took Uncle Ben's life, but decides not to attack him. Before he can get away, the ceiling where he is walking breaks and he falls to the ground. He notices a poster of a masked man on the wall and decides to make himself a mask so that he can go after the criminal without being discovered. The young man makes spider web to use with his powers and puts a device on his two wrists. Peter balances on the edge of a building, but loses his focus and falls, which releases the synthetic web that prevents him from hitting the ground. He then uses a radio to listen to all police reports, then puts on his mask and uses buildings and helicopters as support for his web. Parker catches a thief, but realizes that he is not the man who took Uncle Ben's life. After a while, people began to call him a vigilante, because he started catching all the bad men in town for the police. Parker makes his own superhero uniform, inspired by a spider. Later, a criminal manages to steal a car, but when he gets into the vehicle, Peter is waiting for him in the back seat. The young man throws webs at the man, who tries to run, but is surprised by the young man, who hits him with his legs. The evil man pulls out a knife and Parker pretends to be afraid, but he easily causes his enemy's hand to stick to the wall by firing his webs, which immobilize him. Peter tries to identify the guy, but a policeman points his gun at him. The young man dodges all the shots, but several cars appear and force him to flee. He manages to jump on top of a car and then a truck, so he goes over the side of the road and crashes into a bus. Parker arrives home late and his aunt asks him what took him so long. The young man hides under his cap, but the woman demands that he remove the hood, realizing that his face is all bruised. At the same time, Rajit wants Connors to start research on humans immediately, but he denies the request because it's still too risky. Rajit wants him to deceive people by saying that the medicine is just a flu shot. Even so, the doctor refuses and is dismissed for it. Dr. Connors then, as a desperate measure, takes a sample of the genes and uses them in his own body, and his organism reacts at the same moment as the application. At school, Gwen invites Peter to the dinner that her mother will prepare later. At dusk, Parker knocks on Stacy's window, which surprises her as he has climbed dozens of floors via the fire escape to get there. He gives her flowers, but the couple is interrupted when the girl's father bursts into the room and invites them down to the kitchen. In the laboratory, the doctor is surprised to see that a lizard arm has grown on the site of his removed limb. After that, the guy makes a call, but some kind of adverse reaction bothers him and causes him to drop the phone. He quickly takes a cab to a river and the cab driver realizes that something is wrong with Connors, as scales appear on his face. During dinner, Peter discovers that George, Gwen's father, is a policeman and is trying to catch the city's new vigilante, who they call Spider-Man. On the other hand, the young man believes that the hero only wants to defend people, which leads to an argument and he is forced to leave the house. When he climbs onto the terrace next to Gwen, Parker tries to tell her the truth, and uses his web to pull her close to him, so she finds out who he is and kisses him. The two are interrupted when the girl's mother appears and calls her home. At that moment, the young man hears a police call. On a bridge, Rajit waits in a traffic jam. Suddenly people start running from something, so the man tries to get out of the vehicle, but he is pressed against the bridge structures. Behind the car, a giant lizard scares everyone. Peter jumps off one of the pillars and uses his web, but the monster manages to get to the big boss and throws his car into the river. At that moment, Spider-Man strikes the creature and manages to catch the car with his web before it hits the water. Several other vehicles are hanging from the web, and while people are calling for help, the monster leaves and Peter decides to help a child trapped inside a car. The little young boy is very frightened, so Parker removes his mask and shows that he is a normal person. The young man finally calms down and the hero gets into the car to unfasten his seatbelt. The vehicle's gasoline begins to leak, which causes a fire, which breaks the web and the vehicle begins to fall. Peter then throws another web and holds the car. He asks the young man to get out of the car as soon as possible, because the flames are going to consume everything. The little young boy puts on his mask and slowly climbs into the vehicle. In a few seconds, the car slips out of Peter's hands, but he casts a web to hold the child, who returns safely to his father's arms. At the same time, Dr. Connors crawls through the city sewers and returns to his human form. On television, George announces an arrest warrant for Spider-Man, since he was the only person recognized at the scene of last night's incident. During a soccer match, Gwen and Peter are kissing in the stands and a ball is fired in their direction. The young man throws the object back, which hits the goalpost, which bends due to the force. Shortly afterwards, Parker goes to the laboratory, where he asks Dr. Connors how to hunt a reptile. The scientist questions why he wants to know about it, as he doesn't know he's Spider-Man. Peter is left alone in the laboratory and comes across a mutant rat with reptilian skin, which devours another animal. Parker goes to the police station to talk to George. He reveals to the officer that the person responsible for the attack is Gwen's advisor, who turns into a giant lizard, but the officer doesn't believe him. On his way home, Peter notices several lizards entering a manhole. The young man follows the reptiles and throws webs in all directions of the tunnel, which forms a support. The doctor now possesses powers such as enhanced vision, yet he continues to increase the dosage of the experimental serum. Peter attaches a camera to one of the webs, and while he's playing on his cell phone, he notices that something causes one of the webs to move. He puts on his mask and prepares to attack. However, several webs begin to move and dozens of reptiles rush towards him. Suddenly, the lizard jumps on him and scratches him with its huge claws. The camera captures several images, but they both fall into the water, so Peter manages to free himself from the creature and goes through a very narrow tunnel that the animal can't pass through. The monster finds the camera trapped in the webs and realizes that Peter Parker's name is written on it, discovering Spider-Man's true identity. The young man then goes to Gwen's house and she despairs when she sees the wound on his chest. They are interrupted when George calls for his daughter, but she tries to disguise it and closes the bedroom door. Stacy returns to tend to Parker's wounds and he confesses that he needs to stop the monster, since it was he who solved the equation that made his transformation possible. Meanwhile, the lizard applies a new dose of the experimental serum and goes after Peter. In the science school, one of the toilets starts shaking and a hole opens up in the floor, from where the lizard emerges and destroys the school walls. Parker asks Gwen to flee and goes after the giant creature. He traps the monster's feet with his webbing, but the creature manages to push him against the wall. The young man is thrown into one of the rooms and pinned to the ground, but he still tries to throw chairs at his opponent. During the confusion, a student manages to capture Peter's backpack, but the hero is thrown against another wall, which breaks. In addition, the villain uses flash bombs, but Spider-Man appears using his webs to hit pieces of the ceiling on his enemy. Parker jumps on his back and holds him with his webs, causing Connors to struggle and squeeze him against the locker. Spider-Man jumps onto the ceiling and the creature uses a piece of the locker as a weapon and its super strong tail to throw the young man around. The monster's tail breaks off and remains in Peter's hands, but the limb quickly regenerates. The enemy holds Spider-Man by the head, but Gwen appears and distracts him. Before the monster can attack her, Peter gets up and wraps the web around him. He then uses several other pieces to trap him in the tunnel. The young man throws his girlfriend out of the building's window and ties her up with a spider web. Next, Peter fights the creature inside the library, and a gentleman doesn't even notice everything that's happening around him because he's wearing headphones. Suddenly, the monster disappears, so Spider-Man removes his mask and follows the trail to the bathroom, where he finds the Oscorp Industries uniform. The young man goes to the sewers and receives a call from Stacy, who asks the young woman to look for the antidote in the doctor's laboratory. Peter arrives at the crazy man's hideout and discovers that he intends to use one of the pieces of equipment to spread the experimental serum throughout the city. At the same time, the police are focused on hunting down Spider-Man. Some policemen find the lizard and shoot at it. The monster is stopped, but when the men get closer, They realize that its skin regenerates quickly and it uses a greenish gas to fight back. After inhaling the smoke, the policemen turn into reptiles. The creature spreads the serum throughout the city as it heads towards Oscorp Industries, so Peter warns Gwen to leave the site before her enemy arrives. The young woman immediately sets off the emergency alarm to evacuate the laboratory, but remains inside. Parker heads towards the building and is hit by a riot police device. Several armed men surround him, then George removes the vigilante's mask, and at that moment, the young man regains his senses. Peter throws webs at the policemen without hurting them, but Mr. Stacy points his gun at him. The young man reveals his identity and warns him that Gwen is in danger because she's in the lab. Even though George lets him go, one of the policemen shoots Peter in the leg. Meanwhile, the creature scales the Oscorp building and Gwen makes all the doors close. However, the animal destroys them with its bare hands. Stacy hides in one of the rooms and tries not to breathe, but is startled when the animal appears. She uses a spray bottle and a lighter to shoot flames at the monster, but it just grabs something that was next to it and leaves her alone. Parker tries to reach the building, but falls into one of the buildings. He carries on despite his injury, and realizes that there are several cranes lined up so that he can cross the avenue with his web. After getting a bandage, the young man jumps off the building, throws a web at a structure, but doesn't reach it and ends up falling, but one of the cranes lifts him up. Peter jumps from one to the other until he reaches the Oscorp Industries building, and Gwen finally leaves the laboratory and delivers the antidote to her father. However, the monster has already started the gas dispersal device. Spider-Man attacks him at the top of the building, and they both fall into a light fixture. The young man tries to escape, but is thrown into the abyss, so he uses his web to get back into the building. Connors hits him to stop him climbing, but the young man manages to get up and attacks him again. Parker uses his web to go even higher up the building, then the monster throws nitrogen tanks at him. Peter falls and is immobilized by the creature, which breaks his web launcher. However, Mr. Stacy appears and shoots one of the nitrogen hoses, freezing the animal's entire body. Soon after, the young man strikes the crazy man and George hands him the antidote to go to the dispersal device. The monster manages to recover and inflicts a deep wound on the policeman's chest. He advances towards Peter, who is about to put the antidote in the machine, but at the last second the monster holds him back. Even so, the antidote is released and the creature becomes human again. At that moment, Parker plunges from the building as the structure begins to break. He jumps and slides through the glass windows as the debris almost hits him, but Connors pulls him back into the building. Afterwards, Peter goes to George, who is badly injured but still alive. The policeman admits that the city needs Spider-Man and tells him to get away before the police arrive. What's more, he wants Parker to keep his distance from his daughter during his journey as a hero. After the young man agrees to the request, George loses his life. Peter comes home all bruised, and takes the eggs that Aunt May asked for. He observes Gwen at her father's wake, but doesn't approach her. After a few days, Stacy goes to Peter's house and asks why he has disappeared. At that moment, the young man tells her that he can't be with her anymore, and she realizes that he made a promise to her father. In the school corridors, Parker and Flash greet each other, but he and Gwen ignore each other. However, when he enters the classroom, Peter sits down in a chair behind Stacy and she smiles at him covertly, which indicates that the two are still together, but in secret. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.